Hello, I'm Executive Director John Roser here at Scituate Community Television, and we are here with another episode of State House Matters with Jim Cantwell, State Representative for both Scituate and Marshfield. Hello, Jim.
John, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming.
Appreciate it.
So, the first question that I'd like to ask is, I know you were just re-elected,
yes.
And congratulations.
Thank you very much.
If a Scituate resident had a question or there was something that they would like to talk to you personally about, how would they get in touch with you?
Great question. And one of the greatest parts of my job is getting to learn from people throughout Scituate and Marshfield about things that are affecting our lives, where we can either make an impact on a policy matter to help immediately, or it could be an individual constituent concern. Greatest thing I always say, from A to Z, I get to work on things that could be autism reforms that we did a few years ago to mandate that insurance companies pay for services for children when they're really little. And all the evidence was that by having repetitive services to show children how they could teach themselves to eat or tie their sneakers or do, insurance companies didn't want to pay for that. And I had constituents come to office hours over in Marshfield, Marshfield and Scituate stories, but people who came and said, every indication was that you get to learn at a younger age, and if that got covered, that these children would make an advance. So that was from A, we made a model bill to help those with autism, to Z, we're doing zoning reform, and everything in between. The way that I learn is by people contacting me. So if people want to contact me, they can do so by phone. The phone number is at the State House. It's 617-722-2140. Or I have a local office as well, if you want to avoid the toll call. It's 781-837-1960. The second aspect is if they want to email. By email, it's james.cantwell@mahouse.gov. You can do a private one as jim@jimcantwell.com. And then the best thing, John, what I love to have people do is to come in person for office hours. Mm-hmm. Certainly people can come to the State House. I'm up there all the time, so anytime people want to come up if they're in Boston. But as you and I were discussing off air, it's nice that people will come to visit at office hours.
Yes.
And we can talk about this from today. And that's just people will call ahead of time to my office, and people will check in and say, gee, I'd like to meet with you. I do every fourth Friday of the month. I'm at the Scituate Council on Aging. Every second Friday of the month, I'm at the Marshfield Council on Aging. I go to the town halls at least twice a month when people want to call. Or if those 4 dates don't work, I say, just call me. We'll set a date. I pay for an office in Marshfield. And John, to give you examples, by the way, so now we're giving how they can call or email.
Yes.
We were talking off air about how an individual, everyone watching should know that you can make a huge difference in what takes place here in Massachusetts. And some examples. Right here from Scituate, Ed Cavell came to one office hours and said he was outraged that this so-called church called the Westboro Baptist Church were protesting at funeral services, and Ed came like the day after the Supreme Court had said that was protected free speech, and he said, this is wrong, what can we do about it? And we worked together and drafted up legislation that stiffened penalties for people who tried to interfere with the sanctity of funerals. Because even though you have the right to free speech, John, as you know,
that's right.
The government also, the Supreme Court says that we have the right to be able to put some moderate restrictions on speech if it's harmful or offensive or fighting words. And they say we can be able to do time, place, and manner restrictions. So because of Ed coming to me, we got to work, and we just passed legislation in this last term that stiffens penalties for people who go and try to interrupt anyone's funeral, but particularly for a veteran. That was all Ed's idea. Secondly, there's a gentleman named Andy Wenning who came to one of my office hours and said he happens to be in insurance. And John, you knew this already, that in Massachusetts, we have this independent board. If you or I, anyone watching, if you have an accident and you don't believe you're at fault, but the insurance company wants to charge you for 7 years, you'd get a surcharge, you have the right to appeal that finding, and you can go to an insurance appellate board. Well, a few years ago, the insurance companies didn't like this board. They were trying to get rid of it. And it was going to happen. And this Andy Wenning came and said, Jim, I think this is bad for consumers. So I co-sponsored legislation. We got that passed. And by the way, if you are a consumer, you have an accident, you should know 50% of the time people make their case and those surcharges are overturned. So it was a great consumer rights piece. For flood insurance, David Ball, early on, had been calling just before going to meet with the selectmen, and Liz Charlton's here. Liz Charlton is a realtor. People who came and said this would be a disaster for us. And we all know about flood insurance. I know if we have time, we can do an update. But that all came because people just came and they call your rep, call your senator, and we are so pleased to try to take action to help out. And those are just 3 of, I was writing about 20 examples where we've been able to make a difference together because constituents take the time to call or to visit.
That is good to know, and I think that is a good story about actually going and seeing you personally and making a difference.
Right.
Maybe you can, I know that flood insurance is a hot topic here in Scituate and that it affects quite a number of people here, if not everyone here.
Sure.
Maybe you can give us an update, like specifically on the flood insurance and that legislation and what you've done there.
Absolutely. On flood insurance, we have several things happening all at once. And Liz just was showing on the Patriot Ledger, many people would have seen just this week that FEMA had agreed to redo Quincy flood maps, which was a nice success story for Quincy, but we were even better. Scituate and Marshfield and Duxbury, because early on that David Ball and others had educated me, and we spent a lot of time trying to determine how we'd respond. Scituate, our Board of Selectmen voted to appeal the maps. Marshfield did as well. Those maps, there are 2,000 structures, homeowners, in between Scituate and Marshfield, of people who do not have to pay flood insurance right now because we appealed. And that's a credit to our Scituate Board of Selectmen and Marshfield. So we all, working together, made sure that those folks aren't paying right now. Others who were already in flood zones were seeing their rates were going pretty high. And a few things that have helped thus far. One, we appealed the map, so those 2,000 structures are not in a flood zone right now. The update, John, is that there's a 5-member panel of scientists who are going to review the maps that were put together to determine if they were done with improper methodology. We believe they were. In fact, we have proven through the good work of Congressman Keating, Congressman Lynch, Senator Markey, Senator Warren, we proved that they used the wrong model. When they're doing modeling for the maps, they used a Pacific Coast wave model instead of the Atlantic Coast, so the wave action was much exaggerated. So that's just one of multitude of things that these scientists will review. They're going to look at the maps, John. They're all just being appointed. Scituate gets to appoint 2 members of this 5-member committee. Marshall gets to appoint 2. FEMA has 1. So arguably, we're going to have some great influence over how these are reviewed. The cautionary tale that I mentioned today with David Ball and our Scituate Seawall Committee, Coastal Advisory Committee, is Scituate thankfully is going to have the ability to pick 2 of those members, but I'm concerned this list that they were able to choose from, I've been speaking out to make sure that the list of scientists, we want to make sure they're independent, want to make sure they're not all already FEMA approved. Because the joke that I keep on saying, it's not a joke, it would cost us money. It's saying it basically would be akin, if you can only pick from their folks, they're going to be biased. And I was saying today, it's like being told you can take a choice of which gun you want to shoot yourself with. So it's a serious matter. It's very serious because it's very costly. So I want people to know here, the first news, be very proud of your town because our Scituate officials, I was very proud to be working with our Scituate leaders that we were able to appeal those maps. Right now, that appeal still continues, so that all those homeowners who would have had to have flood insurance, you do not have to. The people whose rates were going up because of new maps, rates still are going up, which is my second part of my update, but they are certainly lower than they would have been because of that appeal. So that's one news of update. The second is right now, Congress heard Scituate residents loud and clear. The proudest thing in my terms of office here as a state rep, John, is that our little town here of Scituate and Marshfield, we changed federal law by speaking up early and often. On your behalf, because you've given me the privilege of being a state representative, I got to fly back and forth to D.C. to meet with our federal legislators. We made the case from several hearings that we did here in Scituate and Marshfield to show that if those initial people watching would have heard of Biggert Waters, which was an act that passed a little over 2 years ago. If that had not been changed, John, we would have had homeowners who could have seen their property values plummet by as much as 70% overnight because of these ridiculous charges that were going to be put into effect. We would have seen, we had bankers come and testify that it could have triggered a foreclosure crisis. That was Joe Norton, by the way, one of the bankers who came to that hearing that we had with Ed Markey and later on with Elizabeth Warren. We had our town officials who came forward and said that it would be impossible to pay for town services if we lost 70% of our revenue from these different homes. We had people like David Ball talk about what it would do to individual homeowners. A whole series of very bright people here from Scituate. We made the case for why that law had to be changed, and it was. My concern right now is the law that got changed last year by Congress. They put caps on what FEMA should be charging for increases for flood insurance. And the concern that I have is even though their caps are there, I don't think that FEMA is following the spirit of the law, which was to make sure that those increases would be moderate, so we'd have people stay in their homes, John. I'm concerned that they're taking the cap is, the lowest will be 5% a year increase. The highest would be 18% if people have had repetitive losses and have been close to the ocean. We got to keep the feet to the fire for FEMA to make sure they're not charging people that high rate every single year, because it would make it very difficult to stay in their homes. So that's the second update. And then the third part is we're working hard already. Congress will have to reauthorize the National Flood Insurance Program in 2017. So we have 2 years to really learn from the examples of the last 2 years how we can try to make sure that this act gets perfected. I'm a state legislator, so this is at the federal level. We're going to have we're going to have a lot of thoughtful people here from Scituate, Marshfield, and I'm a chair of the Coastal Caucus at the state level. So we're going to put together our ideas to give to our good friends and good partners, our federal officials, to hope that we'll have a long-term change. So that's a lot of information on flood insurance, but for those who are watching, if you have questions, I'm always pleased to be able to share the knowledge that I have. Again, for the numbers people had before, either locally 781-837-1960 or at the State House 617-722-2140.
Great, Jim. Thank you for that update, and we look forward to more updates as well as things progress, both with legislation locally and federally. I've heard, and we've been discussing, that there's been over 5,000 new pieces of legislation being written and submitted. Maybe you can give us a little bit of information about all this legislation.
Absolutely. One of the great things in Massachusetts is we have the right of free petition. And that's if someone watching here from Scituate says, I have a great idea for legislation, how we began the show, saying come and meet with your legislator, and not just myself, meet with, anytime there are office hours for others. It's worth your time to call and come and meet. You should know, because of our Constitution, if you have a great idea, we'll file it. It could be by your request, and then you get to follow it through the whole legislative process. You get to go to the hearings and give your testimony and the like. Or there are other ideas already that are in the books that you may want to see changed. But the exciting part, the update here, just last Friday was the bill filing deadline for this 2-year session. I'll get to that in a moment. You still could, if you have another idea, it can be filed. It just would take a little bit longer process. But we had over 5,000 bills, as John mentioned, that were filed, and I've filed over 55 of them. A number of bills to help on coastal issues, for instance, trying to make sure the state is going to be actively involved with this reauthorization of flood insurance, calling for a review of flood insurance policies if the rates are higher than we believe they should be, to have the Attorney General's office being able to help us there. A huge issue for all of us here in Scituate and throughout the South Shore of substance abuse prevention. Working very closely with Anne Marie Galvin in Scituate Facts. We filed a series of bills to try to help with that public health crisis. Things as simple as funding drug boxes that we put in police stations. We have in Scituate. Anyone watching, if you have unused medications in your cabinet, you should take them out, bring them to the Scituate police station, and you can just dump them right there, so it could never become a problem for someone happening to take what's not their own medication, or for that matter a problem for the environment. So that's a legislation I've co-sponsored to require that pharmaceutical companies have to be involved, putting funds up front to be paying for the process of collecting these unused prescriptions. Legislation to strengthen, we have a thing called a prescription drug monitoring program that, John, if you or I went to a doctor and we legitimately had pain, and we had prescribed OxyContin or Percocets or the like, and they gave us 60 pills, if I then go to another doctor a week later trying to get another 60 pills, they'll know that it's supposed to be put in the system. We're not only mandating it, but we're trying to do a better job of being able to educate people who are the professionals who do these prescriptions. So there's a great deal of legislation for that. have legislation trying to help consumers on a series of things, trying to make sure that as it relates to homeowners policies, and for folks who have to get private mortgage insurance, we're trying to give them some protection. You'll see, if you want to write, I'll be doing a write-up we put on my website, just my name, www.jimcantwell.com. We'll list our legislation. I'd be interested to have your thoughts about some of those things that we filed. So that's just been the exciting process just in the last week. And it's a 2-year session, John. So if people do have ideas in the next year and 11 months, we still can be able to file legislation to try to address your thoughts too. So I guess the overall message really from today's show is, if you have a great idea, please come and visit at office hours or call me or email. Watch our show here, because we love the opportunity to come. John, and maybe in the future, if some people who've had ideas, they can join us, and we'll talk about legislation that got filed as a result of their good thoughts, and be able to make the best use of Scituate Community Television. So another great visit with Jim Cantwell here for Scituate Community Television, State House Matters with Jim Cantwell, and we'll see you next time on SCTV. Thank you.